This is the beginning of a new series on thermofaxes and their versatility. And we all have to start somewhere. So today I want to talk about the screen, and I want to talk about products, and then I just want to give you a couple of quick examples of printing with the screen so you'll know how, and then you'll want one. And so Thermofax, basically the history. The machine made the masters through which purple ink was forced to print mimeographs. Those were the purple copies that some people are still old enough to remember from being in elementary school. Most of you kids, and I'm talking anybody younger than 50, you may not remember those mimeographs because the machine was so outdated by the time the copier came along, then computers came along, then printers came along. So the thermofaxes were just stacking up in warehouses in the Midwest. The thermofax machines were just sitting in disrepair, not literally out in the middle of fields, but in warehouses, forgotten and neglected. And then somebody refitted the thermofax machine so that they could run this plastic film that was laminated to polyester through the machine with a carbon copy, and they could turn those into designs that we put in frames and we print. And that's essentially how the thermofax is made. Now, there aren't very many machines around anymore, but there are plenty of people around the country who offer services where they will create these screens for you from your own artwork, or they, in our case, we have a library of over 200 library of 200 designs that are available that are really cool designs, and they are at your fingertips. And you could have a stack of screens a mile high, but if you didn't know how to print them, what good would they do? So let's get right to the printing. Today I'm using just a black cotton. You can print on any fabric. Thermofaxes are not picky. They love everything. And I'm using an opaque paint, which means the color stays true on black fabric. It doesn't turn. Some paints are like Elmer's glue. When they dry, they turn into a light glaze, but not opaque paint. You can count on it to be strong and pure color after it dries, so it's great. And I buy from ProChem, and I don't get paid to say that, but they make a great line of paints, and they have taught me so much over the course of my career. I think it's important to give back. So here's to Vicki at ProChem. Now, this paint is a kissing cousin to acrylics. And what that means is that it will dry and then it will be permanent. And that's really good news if it's on your fabric, but it's not such good news if it's on your clothing, which is why I should have on an apron, and you should have on an apron too. And it's not good for the screen, because if I print the screen and then I'm busy admiring it, or I'm showing it to Zena how beautiful it looks and I'm totally in love with it, well, the screen's drying and it's going to be ruined. So you want to print and wash, print and wash. You can print a whole bunch if you want to, as long as you keep moving and you keep fresh paint coming across the screen. But when you stop, don't congratulate yourself too early. Go and wash the screen first. So I'm going to put some paint out here on the tape. See, the film is taped into a frame to make it stable. And some people just tape the edges with duct tape, but it makes a very sort of floppy surface, and it's hard to control, and it flops, and then your paint gets on something. So that's not a good idea. Don't let anybody try to convince you to do that. So I'm putting enough paint out here. I might have more than I actually need, but that's good, because the paint's drying as I'm screening it, and I don't want it to dry out in the screen. So I might need more in order to make sure that it stays moist and active. I want to keep the squeegee. Oh, by the way, you need a thin blade squeegee. You could use a credit card. We have these little squeegees that are perfect for this. They're a little hard to find, so if you don't find one of those and you don't order it from us, you can use a credit card or a Bondo scraper. That's all perfect. They work great. But don't use one of these. This is a great squeegee, but this is a big squeegee that's meant to be used with a silk screen that has a wooden or an aluminum frame, and it's really overkill for thermofaxes. So we're back to the thin blade, nice and straight. Want to keep it perpendicular to the surface and pull it across like this. If I tilt it like that or angle it, I'm getting more paint, and then that makes the fabric stiffer, and it might mean that the design wouldn't be as crisp. I'm going to screen 3 pulls and pop it off. Now, this is opaque paint, so we can see it, but the beautiful thing about opaque paint is that as it dries, it becomes more, the color gets stronger, and you can see it even better. And I'll show you some examples in a minute. Now, let's say that I would like to create this as a repeating pattern all the way across the fabric. There are two ways. If I know this distance right here is about 7 inches, which I think it probably is, although I didn't measure, then I could mark 7 inches from this edge over and put a little pin there, and then bring this over and print the third image and leave this space open until the paint dries. Because the problem with painting side by side or printing side by side is that if I set this down and that paint's wet, I'm going to get what we call a ghost image on the back of the frame, and then that'll transfer later, and that is the beginning of a downhill spiral that you will not like. So you can measure the distance and skip over and then go back and fill in when it's dry if you want to, but I'm kind of impatient, and my students are usually a lot more impatient than I am, so we have the paper trick. Paper trick is to cover that damp paint, and then you can put the screen down. You can push it back to the top, but don't go back and forth like this, because if your screen's the least bit loose in how it was taped, then you run the risk of getting a little bit of a blurred image. And actually, I think I got a little bit of that over on this first print where maybe the screen shifted a little. So hang on to it with one hand and always pull the same direction. Pop that up. See, I should have pinned it down. I forgot my own good advice. And then I would lay another piece on this one. It's possible to actually align this so that you don't have a break. I'm busy chatting you up, so I've got a break there. But when I have a piece of white paper over this, it makes it even easier to align the print. So I'm just slide it up there and then pull it back this way. And then pop that off. See, that's better. I can move it over here. When I do a big piece of fabric and I'm printing like this, I have a whole lot of paper cut in advance. Okay, and so I might continue to have strips. This has got a little paint on it, so that could get on the back of the frame. So I'm gonna, bad practice, but I'm turning it over so I can finish. Anyway, you understand what I'm telling you about using the paper to keep the back of the screen clean. Okay, now I'm going to let that dry for a couple of minutes, and then I'm going to talk about how to put another design on top, which is the essence of building layers. But I can't stand here and yak because the screen needs to be washed, so I'll be right back. Okay, the paint is dry and it turned into this beautiful magenta color. It's lovely on the black. And now I'm going to add another element. And I picked out this circle that I made. It's an orb. And I made it by spray painting a piece of typing paper, printer paper, with a light, just a dusting of black spray paint that created this sort of texture. And then I used that and photocopied it and turned it into various shapes that have that neat texture, which to my eye is more interesting than a solid open circle. So when you see the texture after I've printed it, now you'll know how I got it. So I have the screen, and this is dry, and I have a dominant element now as opposed to the texture I put down before. And so I'm going to put this dominant element 2 or 3 different places on this little length of fabric. And really what I'm doing, I'm making some samples for another project that I'm working on. So some of this irregularity that it's not quite right. That should have matched up a little better than it did. But you know what? That's the thing about being an artist that's really fun. You can just take it, and as soon as you learn to accept whatever it is and then work with it, I mean, that's a life lesson. It's pretty important. So I'm going to put this down, and I'm getting a little bit crazy, daring with the colors. So I'm going to use red, and once again I'm using what they call an opaque paint, because the opaque paint, you see how the color came up on the black as opposed to drying and being more like a clear glaze, which is the translucent or transparent variety of paint that you can find. Okay, now I don't need to put this paint clear up here on the tape the way I did when I was printing this overall larger image. I can put it closer to the image because basically the whole background is solid and only the image is open. And that's a little bit better when it comes to conserving paint. But my technique is the same. I keep the squeegee straight up and down, and this is an example of a screen. Maybe I'll overdo it so you can see. I'm going to screen once. Well, I don't know. Yeah, with a close-up, hopefully you'll be able to see the texture that's in that shape, and certainly you'll be able to see it on another couple samples I have. I could maintain that texture even though it's very dense because I only made one pass. If I make more than one pass, which I'm going to do, I'm going to sacrifice this piece of fabric and the vision I had for it so you can see what happens. If I screen a whole bunch of times and I tilt the squeegee, then I'm more likely to fill in the detail. You see, I tried to show it, screen it so it would be solid like the bottom half of this, but actually the top is still kind of open, which just goes to show you, you're trying to teach people something and it never works out quite the way you had in mind, which is good because then they're inspired to learn a little more on their own. But you can see the difference between the two. The one on the bottom end, wow, how cool. I'm getting a great pattern on, secondary pattern on my printing table. So I'm going to go back up here now, and I'm going to print this again with one pass. And then I'm going to put this paint back in the container. Be a good steward of your resources. And now I've got that lovely texture again. Maybe having one in the middle that's a little bit different adds variety. Okay, now I see another problem. Somehow when I was flinging the paint around, I got a little red yerk of paint there. There's no way for me to get that off. So the best thing to do if this happens to you is not to panic. The best thing to do is to just let that dry out. And when you come back tomorrow, you'll be able to take a little pin and just peel that right off of there. And that is, in my mind at least, preferable to smooshing it down or getting a wet rag or trying to do something else to get rid of it right now. It's probably a bad idea. So that's the basic layering process. And now I'm going to just take a quick break and rinse the screen because, as I have said in other videos, the paint, and in this one earlier, the paint's drying and it will ruin the screen. So I'm going to wash this screen off and then come back and show you just a couple of other layered samples. Okay, so I'll figure out what else I'm going to do with that particular piece off camera. But in the meantime, I just wanted to show a few more samples of the layering process. These were mainly prepared as color studies. So they're not fancy dyed backgrounds at all. As a matter of fact, they're fabrics that I bought that already had the background color. And this is part of a series that I do in my color class on complementary colors. But I just want to point out that I did this background pattern with the curlicue, and it was a transparent paint. So when it dried, it was that glaze effect that I referenced. So it doesn't really look as blue, does it, as the other two images. So this sort of wheel image, that is opaque blue paint, and then there's that circle, that's one of my favorites, so there I used it again, and in that case I added some opaque white to the opaque blue to get a lighter version of the blue, and I waited each time for the other elements to dry before I added the second or third layer. Same thing would be true with this particular piece. Commercial fabric background, and I actually had colors I was matching, which are these chips down in the bottom, and all of the color that you see here is opaque paint. And we have, this is an analogous color study, meaning the colors are neighbors, they're related, but the blue, the green, and the purple all had white added, and you can see how the opaque paint makes the colors pop and stay true on a dark background, or a colorful background. This is the reverse of that other orange sample that I showed. So in this case, I printed the background, let it dry in the orange, then I added this red printing after the orange had dried, and I let the red printing dry. And then I really wanted a vibration, sort of a really bold pop of color against the orange background. So I chose the complement, which is blue, and I added enough white to make it roughly the same value as the background color in the fabric. I had to use opaque paint for the blue so that it would stay blue after it dried and not turn into that glaze effect, because this blue leaf shape wouldn't be nearly as effective if it had turned into that darker sort of gray blue that you saw on the other sample. And so this is what you can learn about transparent paints versus opaque paints, and the Thermofax gives you endless opportunities for layering and studying the color interactions. So now you should have the basic printing under your belt, how to choose the materials, what to look for in the products as far as paints are concerned, and a little bit of advice about how to combine elements and layer them. So you're good to go. Have fun.